On a Saturday night in the quaint English town of Ashford, the air hung heavy with warmth, and the streets buzzed softly with the laughter and chatter spilling from cozy pubs and bustling cafes. But inside the Baker family's charming Victorian home, nestled on a quiet lane shaded by old oak trees, Saturday nights followed a familiar, comforting ritual. Sophie Baker, a 23-year-old with a curious spirit and a hint of mischief in her hazel eyes, lived there with her parents, David and Helen. The house was an heirloom of sorts, filled with antique furniture handed down through generations, and adorned with creeping ivy and potted ferns that brought a touch of wildness to the polished wood and brass fixtures. David, a robust man in his early 50s, carried the quiet strength of a man who had spent years working with his hands, his beard neatly trimmed and flecked with silver. His presence was commanding, softened only after a few pints of ale at the local pub. Helen, 47, always poised and graceful, preferred flowing dresses of soft fabrics and delicate patterns, paired with modest heels and silver bangles that jingled softly whenever she moved. A subtle soundtrack to her measured laughter and warm conversations, Sophie found herself perched on the edge of her bed, clad in a light cotton dress in pale cream, embroidered with delicate floral patterns that hinted at her subtle rebellion against the town's understated fashion. Her bare feet were slipped into tan leather sandals, the straps winding gently around her ankles, revealing toes polished with a deep crimson varnish. Her dark chestnut hair cascaded loosely down her back, catching the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and a handful of slender silver bracelets jangled quietly on her wrist. A small echo of her mother's own style. The evening seemed different from the moment David returned home, unusually lively after a work gathering with his colleagues at the Ashford brewery. His voice boomed through the house, carrying tales of his younger days with an energy that filled the rooms and made the shadows dance. Helen sipped her glass of chilled white wine with a smile that was both amused and something else. Something Sophie hadn't seen often before, a spark that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. While the kitchen filled with the enticing aroma of freshly made shepherd's pies and roasted vegetables, Sophie slipped upstairs. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind her as she closed the door with a soft click. She turned on the oscillating fan, its gentle hum filling the silence, and lay back on her bed, her fingers absently scrolling through her phone. Yet her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the strange new energy that had settled over her family like a thick fog. Hours passed, and the house slowly quieted. The television downstairs murmured softly as she drifted toward sleep. Suddenly, heavy, uneven footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sophie sat up, heart pounding, hoping the footsteps would pass. But the door creaked open, and there, framed in the doorway's dim light, was her father. David's silhouette was broad and slightly unsteady, his eyes searching the shadows as if for something lost. "Helen, love?" he murmured, voice thick and unsteady from the evening's drinks. Sophie's breath caught. Instead of correcting him, a mischievous idea sparked within her. Softly, she shifted her voice, mimicking her mother's gentle tone. "David, I'm here." His face softened, relief washing over it as he shuffled inside and settled beside her on the bed with a tired sigh. Sophie's pulse thundered in her chest, caught in the thrill of the strange, forbidden game unfolding between them. He rambled on about his day, his words a jumbled mix of memories and confusion. His closeness was electric, the warmth of his skin mingling with the scent of his aftershave and lingering hints of the brewery's ale. Sophie found herself tracing idle circles on the back of his hand, feeling the subtle tremble beneath her fingertips. "Have you been working too hard? You need to rest," she whispered, voice low and coaxing. He exhaled deeply, eyes half closed, and for a moment, the world shrank to the space between them. The air thickened, charged with a tension that was both unsettling and intoxicating. David's voice dropped to a husky murmur. "You're different tonight." Sophie's breath hitched. The line between innocence and something far more dangerous blurred. Their conversation dwindled as the quiet engulfed them, a heavy, secret weight pressing down in the dim light of the room. Finally, David's breathing evened out, and he slipped into sleep, unaware of the silent storm that had just begun brewing. Sophie lay awake long after the house fell silent, staring at the ceiling, knowing deep down she had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. A secret, dark and thrilling, had taken root in her heart, one that whispered of mysteries yet to unravel. The morning light filtered softly through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the terracotta walls of Sophie's room. She sat up, the memory of the night before swirling uneasily in her mind like a half-forgotten dream. The house felt empty without her father's presence, but his shadow lingered, tangible and haunting. She dressed carefully for the day, choosing a sky-blue dress cinched at the waist with a gentle flare just above the knees. Her sandals clicked softly on the wooden floor as she descended to the kitchen, where the world seemed oblivious to the secret storm brewing beneath its surface. Helen greeted her with a bright smile. "Good morning, love. Did you sleep well?" Sophie nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, very well. Thanks." David's eyes flicked up from his newspaper, dark and unreadable for a moment longer than usual, before he returned to the sports section. Sophie caught the briefest flash of something in his gaze. A question, a warning, or perhaps just confusion. During breakfast, her mother chattered about plans and recipes, but Sophie's thoughts kept drifting back to the night's delicate, dangerous dance. Was David aware? Had the alcohol erased his memories? Or was there something unspoken simmering beneath their everyday smiles? Later, Sophie escaped to the town market, a riot of colors and scents. Fresh fruit, wildflowers, handcrafted trinkets. She wandered among the stalls, seeking distraction, until a gentle touch on her shoulder made her jump. Turning, she found her father standing there, an awkward, hesitant smile tugging at his lips. "Sophie, can we talk for a moment?" He led her to a quiet corner away from the market's bustle. His cheeks flushed in a way that made her heart skip. "Last night, I can barely remember it," he confessed. "I don't know what happened, but something felt off." Sophie offered a reassuring smile. "Maybe you just had a bit too much to drink." "Dad," he sighed, the tension easing from his shoulders. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right. Nothing strange happened, right?" She reached out, placing her hand lightly over his. "Everything's fine, Dad." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of unspoken things hanging in the air. As they parted, Sophie felt the pull of a secret world opening before her. One that promised danger, discovery, and a story far from over. The weeks that followed in the baker's home in Ashford drifted by with an almost agonizing slowness, as if time itself had stretched to let every moment simmer in thick, unspoken tension. On the surface, life appeared unchanged. Helen continued her graceful routines, David maintained his steady presence, and Sophie remained the dutiful daughter, balancing her online studies and light garden chores in the sun-dappled backyard. Yet beneath the veneer of normality, an invisible current pulsed, a quiet, electric charge that ran through even the most mundane interactions. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie decided to dress with a particular care that felt like a silent challenge to herself. She chose a vibrant scarlet summer dress, its thin straps teasingly revealing her lightly sun-kissed shoulders, the fabric hugging her curves in a way that was elegant without crossing into the overt. The skirt flared just enough to hint at movement, catching the sunlight with each subtle sway. On her feet, she wore cork-soled sandals with slender heels, the kind that made a satisfying click on the old wooden floors. Her accessories were simple but meaningful. Delicate golden butterfly earrings, a gift from her grandmother, whose mischievous smile Sophie often remembered, and a loose braid resting against her neck, strands escaping here and there to frame her youthful face. As Sophie descended the stairs, she caught her father's gaze lingering on her longer than usual. A flicker of surprise, perhaps even something more complicated, shone in David's dark eyes. It was as if the entire house had suddenly transformed into a stage, and Sophie was both the star and the audience, basking in the thrill of being noticed. She smiled, a little wickedly, pretending not to catch the silent dialogue unfolding between them. The day passed with the usual laughter and light chatter. Helen prepared her famous Lancashire hot pot for dinner, the aroma filling the house with comfort. Around the table, the family seemed perfectly ordinary, exchanging stories and jokes, but under the table, Sophie's leg brushed against David's. Not quite accidental, not quite deliberate. Each fleeting contact, every too long glance, stoked the coals of a secret flame burning quietly between them. After dinner, Helen retired early, citing fatigue, leaving David and Sophie alone in the living room. They settled on the worn leather sofa, the TV flickering with an old black and white film. Sophie reclined, letting her head rest lightly on the armrest, the hem of her dress riding up just enough to reveal the smooth skin of her thighs. She felt David's gaze flicker toward her repeatedly, each glance sending a shiver rippling down her spine. When the film ended, David moved to switch off the television, and their hands brushed briefly on the remote control. The touch was so fleeting, so delicate, that an unaware observer would have missed it, but to Sophie, it was a jolt electric and undeniable. They locked eyes, and the silence between them stretched taut, a fragile thread connecting two hearts beating too fast. "Sophie," David's voice was low, hesitant. "Can I ask you a favor?" "Of course, Dad," she replied, steadying her breath. "There's an old box of photographs in the attic. I promised your mother I'd bring them down, but I'm feeling a bit lazy tonight." He gave a sheepish grin. Sophie's heart surged with a strange excitement. "I'll help you." Together, they climbed the narrow, creaky stairs to the attic, a dusty, forgotten space filled with the scent of aged wood and memories. The single bare bulb cast long shadows, and the heat was stifling, wrapping around them like a secret. Sophie's scarlet dress was a vivid splash of color amid the faded trunks and stacks of boxes. She bent to retrieve one, feeling the cool dust settle on her skin, aware of David's gaze tracing the graceful curve of her legs. They settled on the floor, knees nearly touching, and began sifting through the photographs, snapshots of birthdays, seaside vacations, awkward teenage moments frozen in sepia tones. Laughter broke the heavy atmosphere as they recalled stories, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. Sophie reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against David's. This time he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers intertwined softly with hers. The world narrowed to that attic, to their interlaced hands and shared breaths. Sophie's heart thundered wildly, the warmth of his touch igniting a dangerous thrill. Her breath caught as the golden light flickered on their skin, while outside, a stray beam of moonlight slipped through a crack in the roof, spotlighting them in a moment suspended between innocence and temptation. Suddenly, the spell broke. A distant clock chimed, and they snapped apart, both flushed and breathless. Hastily, they gathered the photographs and descended the stairs in silence. David placed the box on the table, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks, Sophie. Don't know what I'd do without you." She wanted to say so much more, her thoughts tangled in webs of longing and fear, but she simply nodded. Alone in the living room, she folded the fabric of her dress in her hands. Feeling the fragile line they danced along that night stretch ever thinner. Later, in her room, Sophie found one of David's handkerchiefs on the sofa. She inhaled deeply, the familiar scent both comforting and forbidden, and tucked it beneath her pillow. As she lay down, the dark whispered promises of a story just beginning. A story that would test boundaries, unravel secrets, and leave no heart untouched. Outside, the rain began to fall again, each drop a soft drumbeat against the window pane. A lullaby for the restless, and an omen of mysteries yet to come. Days slipped by in the Baker household with the steady rhythm of routine, yet beneath the surface, a restless current hummed. A tension neither Sophie nor David dared to name aloud. The gentle English summer was giving way to the first hints of autumn, and Ashford's streets were painted in shades of amber and rust, the scent of fallen leaves mingling with the crisp evening air. One Sunday, Helen decided to host a small family lunch in the garden, taking advantage of the lingering warmth before the chill set in. The garden was a hidden jewel behind their Victorian facade. Roses climbing the brick walls, lavender bushes swaying in the breeze, and a wrought iron table set beneath a canopy of twinkling fairy lights. Sophie chose a soft yellow cotton sundress with thin straps that revealed the gentle curve of her shoulders and the smooth expanse of her upper back. Her sandals were simple flats, and around her neck hung a delicate silver locket, an heirloom from her grandmother, its clasp worn from years of being opened and closed. Her hair was loosely tied back, strands escaping to frame the youthful contours of her face, lending her a natural, effortless beauty. David was unusually quiet that morning, his usual joviality replaced by a contemplative silence. He sat opposite Sophie at the table, and though Helen chatted animatedly about her latest knitting project, Sophie felt the weight of her father's gaze settle on her like a physical presence. His eyes lingered with an intensity that made her skin tingle. A silent conversation passing between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. During the meal, Sophie deliberately brought up her father's favorite song from the 1980s, knowing it would coax a smile or a story from him. True to form, he chuckled, sharing a tale of his youthful misadventures, the kind that made Sophie laugh until her cheeks ached. After lunch, Helen excused herself to call her sister, leaving Sophie and David to clear the dishes in the kitchen. The close quarters made it impossible to ignore the electric atmosphere. Sophie was stacking plates when she felt his presence close behind her. "You look very pretty today, Sophie," David murmured softly. She flushed, a shy smile playing on her lips as she glanced over her shoulder. "Thanks, Dad." There was a pause, then Sophie deliberately dropped a napkin to the floor. Bending to pick it up, she felt his gaze tracing the curve of her back. The moment was charged, not forbidden, but undeniably charged with a secret electricity. Sophie's heart pounded as she met his eyes, both of them aware of the fragile boundary they skirted. The day wound down quietly, but the undercurrent remained, a subtle thread weaving through their interactions. Later that evening, as Sophie settled onto the couch with a book, David appeared with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. An echo from her childhood that sent a warmth flooding through her. She sipped the drink slowly, feeling the comforting weight of the cup in her hands and the weightier, more complicated feelings swirling beneath the surface before bed. She lingered in front of the mirror, studying the reflection that seemed both familiar and strange. Her lips were a little fuller than before, her eyes brighter, shadowed with a hint of something new. Awareness, desire, and perhaps a touch of fear. After much deliberation, she chose a soft cotton nightshirt with short sleeves and pulled on colorful socks patterned with pineapples. A whimsical nod to her childhood that still made her smile as she lay in bed. The rain began again, a steady patter against the window. Sophie thought she heard footsteps in the hallway, but the house was silent except for the rain's gentle rhythm. A lullaby for secrets yet to be revealed. Days passed, filled with the ordinary chores of life and the extraordinary tension simmering beneath. Sophie and David exchanged glances that lingered just a moment too long, touches that brushed past innocence, and silences thick with things left unsaid. Each tried to mask their feelings behind casual conversations and shared routines, but the invisible thread between them grew tauter, threatening to snap. One Friday evening, Helen left to help a friend in a neighboring village with preparations for a party, leaving the house quiet save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Sophie decided to take control of the evening and prepared dinner herself. She chose a colorful embroidered blouse paired with a flowing skirt, the fabric light and airy against the cool autumn air. Her hair was braided loosely, intertwined with a thin ribbon, a talisman from her school days that gave her a strange sense of confidence. David sat at the table, pretending to be absorbed in his phone, but Sophie caught the way his eyes kept drifting toward her wrists, where a thin silver chain bracelet, a gift for her 18th birthday, caught the light. She played with a loose strand of hair, deliberately letting it brush against the curve of her neck, adding a subtle, playful tension to the air. Dinner passed in silence, punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder and the soft tapping of rain against the windows. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. The storm had arrived. Sophie startled, but David's hands found her shoulders, steadying her. "It's just the storm," he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. They lit candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. Sophie felt like a character in an old film noir, the tension in the room thick as velvet. David reached out, offering his hand, and she took it, their fingers entwining naturally. They moved slowly to the rhythm of a soft bolero playing on the old record player, the music wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Sophie rested her hands on David's broad shoulders as he gently clasped her waist. For a moment, the world outside vanished, leaving only the two of them in a fragile bubble of light and shadow. When the dance ended, David draped his jacket over Sophie's shoulders. A familiar, fatherly gesture that sent a surprising shiver down her spine. They sat together on the sofa, the candlelight illuminating his face as he shared stories of his youth, dreams, and fears. Sophie laughed softly, feeling a closeness that was comforting yet tinged with an unspoken complexity as the storm passed and the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. They shared a glance filled with tenderness and understanding. A moment of unspoken agreement to hold back, to protect what was fragile and precious. "Good night, Dad," Sophie whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "Rest well, Sophie," he replied, his hand gently stroking her hair. Later, alone in her room, Sophie found a small note resting on the windowsill, written in her mother's delicate handwriting. Some things are never spoken, only felt. And sometimes, that's enough. She smiled through a tear, knowing deep down that their story was far from over, because behind every storm in Ashford, there was a secret waiting to be uncovered. The days that followed settled into a fragile routine, the kind that masks a gathering storm beneath calm waters. Ashford wore its autumnal cloak, leaves swirling in golden eddies along the cobblestone streets, and the Baker household seemed untouched by the shifting seasons, at least on the surface. To the casual observer, Sophie was the devoted daughter, David the steadfast father, and Helen the ever-gracious mother, tending to the home with her usual elegance. But beneath the surface, a silent tension wove its intricate web, binding Sophie and David in a delicate dance of glances, touches, and unspoken desires. Friday evening arrived with the soft patter of rain against the windows, the kind of weather that invited introspection and whispered secrets. Helen had gone to visit a friend in a neighboring village, leaving the house in the quiet company of father and daughter. Sophie decided to take charge of dinner, a small act of independence that sent a thrill racing through her veins. She chose a dress that day with care. A soft, embroidered blouse in shades of deep sapphire paired with a flowing skirt that brushed just past her knees. The fabric was light against her skin, and her hair was woven into a loose braid, a slender ribbon entwined as a keepsake from her schooldays, lending her a subtle confidence. David sat at the kitchen table, pretending to be absorbed in the evening news on his phone, but Sophie could feel his gaze flickering toward her again and again. Her bracelet, a delicate silver chain she'd received for her 18th birthday, caught the candlelight, sending tiny reflections dancing across the walls. She toyed with a strand of hair, letting it fall teasingly against the curve of her neck, aware of the electricity humming between them as rain intensified outside. The lights suddenly flickered and then died, plunging the house into a warm, shadowy darkness. Sophie jumped, a shiver running through her, but David's steady hands found her shoulders, grounding her. "It's just the storm," he murmured softly. They lit candles, their dancing flames casting flickering silhouettes across the room. The air grew thick with a charged stillness, like a secret waiting to be told. David extended his hand, and Sophie took it, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breath. Slowly, they moved to the soft strains of a bolero playing on the old record player, its warm notes swirling through the dim light. Sophie rested her hands lightly on David's broad shoulders while he wrapped his arms gently around her waist. For a brief moment, the world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them suspended in a fragile bubble of intimacy and shadow. Her heart thundered in her chest, a wild drumbeat beneath the calm surface. When the dance ended, David draped his jacket over Sophie's shoulders. A simple, protective gesture that sent a shiver of unexpected delight through her. They settled on the sofa, candlelight illuminating the gentle lines of his face as he spoke softly of his youth, dreams long past, and hopes tucked away like fragile treasures. Sophie laughed quietly, feeling a closeness that was both comforting and charged with an unspoken complexity as dawn's first light crept through the curtains. They shared a look filled with tenderness and understanding, an unvoiced vow to hold back, to protect the fragile thread that connected them. "Good night, Dad," Sophie whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "Rest well, Sophie," he replied, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face with a tenderness that lingered long after he left. Later, alone in her room, Sophie discovered a small note resting on her windowsill, penned in her mother's delicate handwriting. "Some things are never spoken, only felt. And sometimes, that's enough. A tear traced a solitary path down Sophie's cheek as she smiled softly, knowing deep within that their story was far from over. Behind every storm in Ashford, a secret waited. A mystery wrapped in shadows, ready to unravel. Yet, as the rain whispered against the glass, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching from beyond the garden gate, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows and into their lives. The following week in Ashford unfolded with the deceptive calm of a quiet sea before a storm. Sophie moved through her days with practiced ease, attending her online classes in the sunlit corner of the drawing room and helping Helen in the kitchen, the scent of freshly baked scones mingling with the sharp tang of autumn leaves drifting through open windows. Yet beneath the gentle rhythm of domestic life, a taut thread of anticipation wound tighter around Sophie's heart. One crisp Thursday evening, as twilight painted the sky with strokes of lavender and rose, Sophie found herself standing before the old mirror in her bedroom, contemplating her reflection. She wore a delicate cream blouse with lace trim that softly hugged her slender frame, paired with a high-waisted skirt in muted teal that swayed just below her knees. Her feet were slipped into simple ballet flats, and around her neck hung the silver locket from her grandmother, a talisman she touched unconsciously as she smoothed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The reflection staring back was both familiar and enigmatic, a young woman on the cusp of discovery, her eyes alight with quiet determination and a hint of mischief. Downstairs, the house hummed with the soft murmurs of evening routines. Helen was setting the dining table with china that had seen generations of family meals, while David was in the sitting room, immersed in a thick leather-bound book. Sophie descended the stairs with a grace that belied the fluttering nerves within her chest. She caught David's gaze as she passed, his dark eyes lingering a moment longer than usual, a silent exchange passing between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Dinner was a quiet affair, filled with the comforting clinks of cutlery and the gentle crackle of the fire. Helen chatted about her plans for the weekend, but Sophie's attention was drawn to the subtle shifts in her father's demeanor, the way he occasionally met her gaze with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. After the meal, Helen retreated early to her bedroom, leaving Sophie and David alone in the sitting room. The room was bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, casting long shadows that danced across the walls lined with bookshelves. Sophie settled onto the plush armchair, feeling the smooth fabric beneath her fingertips, while David remained by the fireplace, the warmth licking at his features. Their conversation began cautiously, touching on mundane subjects, the weather, memories of Ashford in years past. But soon, the words grew more personal, more revealing. David spoke of his youth with a wistful smile, sharing tales of first loves and dreams deferred. Sophie listened, captivated, her own stories weaving between his like threads in a tapestry. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air thick with a delicate tension that neither dared to acknowledge aloud. As the evening deepened, Sophie felt a restless energy stirring within her. She rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at the garden where the moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver shadows on the dew-kissed grass. David joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Sometimes, he murmured, voice low and tremulous, the past has a way of reaching into the present, doesn't it? Sophie nodded, her breath catching as their eyes met in the mirror-like glass. The unspoken truths hung between them like fragile glass ornaments, beautiful and dangerous. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed from the front door, breaking the spell. Both turned, startled, as if awakening from a dream. David moved to open it, revealing a stranger standing under the porch light. A man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. Evening, the man said, his voice gravelly with an accent Sophie couldn't place. I'm looking for David Baker. There are matters he needs to address. Things from long ago that refused to stay buried. A chill ran down Sophie's spine as the stranger's gaze flicked toward her, lingering just a moment too long. The quiet life they had known was unraveling, and the secrets that had simmered beneath the surface were beginning to spill into the light as the door closed behind the visitor. Sophie felt the weight of the unknown settle around her like a shroud. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was here, demanding reckoning. And in the shadows beyond the garden gate, something stirred, watching, waiting for the moment to step into the unfolding story.